I want to finish by saying I think that the radical Enlightenment went gradually out of the window in the 19th century. It remained a very major force, actually, as anyone who studied the 1830 and 1848 revolutions knows, during the first half of the 19th century. Most of the big political movements in the 19th century, however, were much more hierarchical and anti-democratic. Obviously, that's true of the religious revival and of imperialism later, and of the resurgence of monarchism and imperialism in Germany and Italy and Britain and so on in the late 19th century. But in a way, it's also true of Marxism. But what you see starting in the 1830s is a growing collision between the heirs of the radical Enlightenment and the founders of the socialist movements and tendency. Especially in France, you can see this very clearly, and in Brussels in the 1830s and 1840s. So there is a deep, in the oppositional circles to the dominant system in Europe, or the dominant world order restored by the Congress of Vienna, there's a growing split between those who think that most of the world's population live in miserable circumstances under oppression because the economic system has been appropriated by a small group who organize everything else to suit their interests and against the interests of the majority. If you can seize control of the means of production and change the economic system, that in itself will emancipate the majority, that people will be freed from oppression, and by changing the economic system, you will then end misery and have a happier society. Now, that conception is fundamentally opposed. The essence of the radical Enlightenment conception is the same starting point. Most people in the world live in miserable circumstances under oppression, but the oppression is the vested interest that placed people under oppression, which for Diderot d'Holbach is basically an alliance of kings with priests and aristocrats, prevails because of the lack of education, the ignorance, the superstition, the religious fanaticism, as they would put it, of the bulk of the population. And you can't free people from their miserable circumstances or oppression. You can't have a better or happier society unless you can somehow free people from their ignorance, their suppression, and their subservience to religious authority. So that you can only do by enlightening society as a whole. So it's not gaining control of the economic system. It's changing the way people think, which is the crucial, changing the ideas of most people, enlightening society as a whole, which is the crucial thing for the radical Enlightenment. Now, this doesn't mean, of course, as you can see, if you read Condorcet or Brissot, they were well aware of the need to modify the economic system. They wanted economic changes. Brissot very hostile to bankers, for instance. They thought that all sorts of modifications were needed. But that doesn't mean that you have to... the economic entrepreneurship, business, the system of economic life as such can't simply be transformed into some completely different economic system like communism. They couldn't view the future of mankind along those lines. They thought that what was needed was modification and regulation, and especially society through government and law restricting what capitalists. It's interesting that they use the term capitalist quite a lot already in the 1790s, and they say that capitalists only think about their own interests, and that no one is more, Brissot says in one place, no one is more antisocial than bankers and capitalists. So we can take that as being a given, but that doesn't mean that you can do away with capitalism. It means that you have to regulate through the force of government and law and what is in society's own best interest. So I think the vision of the socialists and the vision of the radical Enlightenment were different, and it's fascinating how this is reflected in contrasting histories of the Great French Revolution. If you read Louis Blanc's history of the French Revolution, you'll see that he tries to whitewash Robespierre, as a number of the other socialists do, whereas in the tradition of Lamartine or all sorts of writers on the French Revolution, are more in this radical Enlightenment tradition, they see rather the Brissotins as their heroes, and Robespierre and his friends as great rascals.